This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Another episode of Fins, Fur, and Feathers kicks off today's show as Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken converse about trout. They discuss where they are native and what people need to do to be able to fish for them. K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner continues the show as he previews an upcoming educational program for cattle producers that is taking place at the Topeka Farm Show. Mike Brouk, K-State Dairy Specialist, ends today's show as he explains how dairy farmers can use technology and data to improve calf management. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show with part of the Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast from K-State's Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken.
Welcome back to Fins, Fur, and Feathers. This week we've got an aquatics episode, Joe, so what do you want to talk about today?
Yeah, it's getting a little chillier out there, and so that's a good time for some cold water fish, and I thought today we'd talk about trout. Kansas has a great fishing program, a trout fishing program, where they take hatchery-raised rainbow trout and stock them throughout the state just to give another fishing opportunity in the colder months. So good opportunity to talk about that program, but also a little bit of the biology and life history of some of the trout species.
Sure. Do we have any native trout in Kansas?
Nope. In Kansas, there are no native trout, and so every trout that we catch is going to be stocked. So there's one exception to that, but for the most part, the water in Kansas gets too warm for trout to really thrive. They're a cold water fish, so they need colder water. The summers in Kansas are just too hot. So it's generally not the water temperature itself that causes harm to fish, but when they're hot, they're stressed out. They tend to have weaker body quality, and then they get diseased or ill quickly, easily. When that happens, their numbers just plummet, they die, and so we see that kind of warm water take over and doesn't really allow for these trout to be native in Kansas.
Okay. More specifically, which of these trout species are native in some of those places and which ones have been introduced?
Yeah, so the rainbow trout and the cutthroat trout would be native species there. There's some Apache trout that are found kind of in little niche areas. Gila trout are found down in the southwest. But the species that are going to be, if we went back a few hundred years, we would be catching rainbow trout. You'd be catching cutthroat trout. And then a lot of the different species that we're talking about are subspecies of those. The Gila trout and Apache trout are both types of cutthroat trout.
Okay.
Right? And so we see examples of that. People will talk about, hey, what about steelheads? I hear that a lot, right? Mm-hmm. Steelheads are really genetically, they're a rainbow trout. And so, we get variations like that. Trout have a lot of different groups, but genetically speaking, there's really those two species. And so thinking about the species that we have, it really should go back to those two. Now, we really like to catch trout, or at least we really liked to, 40 or 50 years ago, so much that we stocked a lot of these fish. We've changed their range a lot. And so there's been a lot of expansion, a lot of introduced species that now I would say are probably part of the ecosystem, introduced, but they've naturalized in a lot of those habitats. So another really important thing to keep in mind is that we've changed the habitat in a lot of these different areas. So putting in reservoirs or little lakes, side chutes, things like that would not have historically been there, along with those man-made changes in habitat, many of which came for important reasons, controlling flooding, for example. Or water for different towns. But in doing that, we've kind of changed the fish population. So different changes, but, there's those two main groups that are out there. And on others, the East Coast, too, I guess. Don't forget those trout that are out on the East Coast that we've mentioned before, too.
What about things that we call trout that may not necessarily be trout?
Yeah, I think, what comes to mind there are char, and there's a lot of different species of char, but brook trout are small char, so there are they're not technically a trout species, even though we've been talking about them like that. Lake trout can get really big, and lake trout are a type of char, and so, but they look like trout, right? And so if we were to pull them out, if you went fishing for them, they'd act like trout. They'd be very similar, but from a scientific standpoint, they are definitely a different group there.
What about a bull trout? Would that be a char, or is that a trout?
Well, that's generally a char too. There's going to be some regional differences there on what a bull trout is. That's just going to kind of depend on where you're at, But most of the time, those are not trout. You can get big brown trout, again, that people might refer to as bull trout. People can use the term bull trout to mean a really, really big rainbow, right? And so you get kind of a lot of that variation depending on where you're at. So lots of different changes. Those endemic terms, that's why we have, scientific names. But the reason is that if we're talking about something on paper with the Latin name, we know what it is, right? And that gets a little bit tricky when we start talking about some of these variations in groups. And so a steelhead versus a rainbow, they look a lot different. But if we're talking about Oncorhynchus micus, that's a rainbow trout, right? Yeah. Regardless of what it looks like, regardless of whether it has that bright pink line and a bunch of spots, or it's more silver and universal in color. So fun to kind of start thinking about, just getting back to science. Why do we have to learn those names, and why do we use those complicated names?
Do they have any physiological adaptations that are interesting or that we don't see very often in other fish species?
Yeah, a couple come to mind. So that ability to change their physiology to survive in freshwater and saltwater is really cool, I think, and that takes a lot more needs to change than just we think about. So pretty cool feature there. Another really common one that when I think about trout, I think about their adipose fin. And so if you look on the dorsal side, the back of a trout, they have their dorsal fin. But behind that, kind of between their dorsal fin and their tail or their caudal fin, there's just a little bump of flesh, right? Mm-hmm. That little bump is called the adipose fin. And that's, I think, a pretty unique feature. It's found on trouts and salmonids. It's found on some catfish. We used to think that it was just residual. It didn't really have any purpose at all. And so we would do things like mark recapture studies. We would cut those off thinking that it didn't impact the fish at all to know that a fish was caught. And more recent studies have shown that fin actually helps fish to sense different flows. And so, it's kind of cool to think. It seems like a relatively low level is probably the wrong term, but kind of an introductory thing. Like, hey, it's cool that as scientists we can still discover, foundational, fundamental science like that. Like, what's the purpose of this fin, even though it's been studied for 100 years or something? It's kind of cool to think about. But that adipose fin comes to mind. It just, it helps them sense flows in different habitats. And if we think about where trout and salmon are living in those streams and rivers, makes sense that they'd have something that can help them with that.
Kind of what's their diet? Are there differences depending on what species we're looking at and that sort of thing?
Yeah, most of the trout, when we think about trout, most of them are going to be eating insects. And so one of the great ways to go catch them is to fly fish for them, right? And so we're imitating an insect that's landing on the water. And so that would be a lot of the native species would be eating different insects. Some of the bigger trout, lake trout, are going to eat other fish, amphibians. So when we start getting into big groups, they may eat more of that. By far, the vast majority of native trout would be invertebrates of some sort. So they're out there, they're eating invertebrates in a lot of those native habitats.
Coming back to trout fishing in Kansas, how's that opportunity exist? Where would a person go if they wanted to catch trout? Do they need any special permits, anything like that?
Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks has this cool program, and it's just to provide another fishing opportunity in the cooler months. And so from December 1st to March 31st, there's a trout season in Kansas where you need to buy a trout stamp. I think it's $14.50 or something like that. So you need that, and you need a regular fishing license to be able to fish for them. Outside of those dates, come April, if there's still some trout around, you're allowed to fish for them without that trout stamp. They're stocked throughout the state. There's about 30 or 35 different locations. You can look that up on Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks website. They have these different fish where they go stock them. and they've stocked them, a few different times, at least the popular ones, a few different times throughout the season.
Are there any special ways that we would fish for those trout besides power bait?
Sure. Power bait's the most common. That's kind of the easiest thing, but you can go fly fish for them. And so getting out your fly rod, it's a good excuse to do that in Kansas, a good opportunity. Another fun way to do it, and it depends on what winter we have, right? But going out and ice fishing, especially in the northern part of Kansas, the last couple of years we've had ice that's reached 4 inches thick. And that 3 to 4 inch range, I like to say 4 inches because I'm a little more on the safe side. Mm-hmm. 4 inches thick is when it's safe. There's something called a spud bar, which is basically a long metal walking stick kind of deal, and you kind of hit the ice with that as you walk to make sure it's not gonna break through. The fly fishing and the ice fishing, two good ways to go out there and enjoy fishing in the colder months.
If we want to go to one of those bodies of water where trout are stocked and we're fishing for crappie or bluegill or bass during trout season, do we need to make sure that we've got that trout stamp?
Well, that depends on the body of water, whether you need to have a trout stamp in those areas or not. And so this is new for 2024. Some different ponds or bodies of water are going to require that you have a trout stamp, whether you're actively fishing for trout. Other bodies of water, if you're not targeting trout, then you do not need to have a trout stamp. So it's going to depend on which body of water you're going to. Definitely make sure you look up the regulations for that body of water before you're going out, and make sure that you are only targeting trout if you do have that trout stamp.
Once again, that was Joe Gerken and Drew Ricketts with part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode. You can check out the full episode on trout by searching for Fins, Fur, and Feathers on your favorite podcast streaming platform, or you can also do so by following the link in today's show notes on agtoday.net or by going to wildlife.k-state.edu. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about a hands-on learning experience for cattle producers with K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner. Jason, thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks, Shelby, for the opportunity to be on. Appreciate it as always.
Jason, what is this hands-on experience that cattle producers could attend?
Yeah, we just really thought that this was a great opportunity to promote a program that is going to be happening here after the first of the year. That we think is really a unique opportunity to combine some good basic information that we always want to stress with cow-calf producers this time of year, with some hands-on opportunities to engage folks. And so we're really excited about a unique program that we're putting together this year in conjunction with the Shawnee County Extension Office. And so really the title of this program, it's called Fundamental Tools to Manage Winter Beef Cow Nutrition Programs. And it's going to be taking place here at the Topeka Farm Show, which will be the first week in January here right after the first of the year. So it's coming right up, you bet.
What are some of the fundamental tools that will be talked about in this programming?
So the big thing that we always want to stress with producers, and particularly right now we're really focused on our spring calving producers because many of them are going to start calving early to mid-January, of course, all the way through February or March, just kind of depending on how their system is structured. But it's really getting back to the basics of understanding, how we're going to make important nutrition decisions on cow herds going through this time of the year, and being able to implement and understand the use of the body condition scoring system with producers, as well as also understanding forage and feed analyses, and how we're going to handle collecting those samples and being able to interpret the results, and being able to put that in play with making strategic feed management decisions on cow herds going into this time of year. So we really think it's a nice opportunity to combine those things together in a real informal, interactive format that we hope is engaging for producers, and that's what we'd really like to see there. and just an opportunity where we can do some hands-on types of activities that aren't always necessarily the easiest to do. And so we saw this as an opportunity to combine this program with the Topeka Farm Show to just be a nice interactive event that folks can come and attend. And so it's going to really be focused on understanding, again, forage analyses. And so when we collect forage samples, understanding the proper manner to do that and the right tools that we need to have in order to be able to take good forage samples, and just really going back to understanding the basics with that process and stressing with producers, why that's so important when we think about making supplementation and feeding decisions. Having good, sound forage analyses is a really key component of that. And so that's certainly going to be one aspect to the program, but then also to combining that with doing some good beef cow body condition score evaluation approaches or methods there. Being able to do that with live animals is very, very instructional and just extremely valuable from the standpoint of educating folks and just working through that system with people. Anytime we have the opportunity to do that in a hands-on format, that's always really good. So we'll have some videos and some other supplementary information and handouts and that sort of thing for people to be able to pick up and take home with them. But it's really going to be a integrated, hands-on type of an approach is the basis for the system. Yep.
Really a time for producers to come to the show, too, and ask K-State Extension professionals questions about their beef cattle, maybe?
Absolutely. So we think it's a really great opportunity when folks are coming into the trade show and working through their day. We know that everybody's got maybe a list of things that they want to be able to go see that they have a unique interest in at the show. And so it's a great opportunity for them to be able to spend some time with us and get some questions answered and do that in a manner that is very convenient for them when they come to the show. And so the way that we've structured this program is this program will be offered throughout multiple times throughout the show. And so the show runs Tuesday, January 7th through Thursday, January 9th. And so each day we'll have at least 2 programs that will be offered during the day. And so that'll allow folks to have the opportunity, if they come to the show, in the morning and they want to be able to catch a program in the afternoon or vice versa, they have multiple opportunities to be able to attend so it fits their schedule. What time are those programs on those days? Absolutely. So on Tuesday, January 7th, we'll have a program that'll be offered at 9:30 a.m., and then we'll offer it again at 12:30 p.m. And at each offering, the total time will be about 45 minutes to an hour's worth of time. And we encourage folks to be able to come as they're able to. They're not necessarily required to be there the entire time. They can come and go to those sessions as they see fit, as their schedule allows. And then on Wednesday, January 8th, we'll be at 9:30, 11:30 a.m., and then again at 4:30 p.m. to accommodate the later afternoon, where that show is open for attendees later in the day. So we've got a time there to be able to accommodate folks that are coming during that time period. And then on Thursday, January 9th, we'll be at 9:30 and 12:30 p.m. again as well. So several opportunities for folks to be able to come and participate with us, and just a great opportunity to interact with multiple extension professionals that'll be represented there at the show, and great opportunity to engage, learn, ask questions in a unique setting format. For attending this program, is there any cost or registration that's needed? No, there's not. There's no cost or pre-registration that's required. If folks come into the trade show, they're certainly able to just come on over and find us. We'll be in the Domer Arena within the Stormont Vale Event Center there at Topeka, and so that's where we'll be. And so we'll just be inside the main arena there and set up, and we'll have those formal sessions that'll be going on at those scheduled times that I mentioned. But the nice thing is there will be folks who will be around there pretty much throughout the entire day, and so we just encourage folks to be able to come up and they're more than happy, and we're happy to visit with them, and they're certainly more than welcome to come up and visit with us at any time if they come by our demonstration area where we're going to be. And so it's just a great opportunity to engage and interact with folks. And really, as we see it, we think about, this time of year, we know that folks, they've got, lots of things that they've got to try to get done in a short amount of time, and it's a busy time for everyone involved in production agriculture. And so when there's opportunities to incorporate an educational program like this into an agriculture trade show, that's a great opportunity. And so it's a great opportunity to highlight what we do with Extension and combine a couple of different opportunities to engage people.
Jason, from the topics that you mentioned, all the way from body condition scoring to forage testing, what are you really excited about to talk with attendees?
I think really the main thing that we're really excited about with being able to present this with producers is the opportunity to just have some integrated hands-on types of approaches, or an integrated hands-on instructional opportunity. Anytime we have the ability to from a body condition score education standpoint, in the case of beef cows, anytime that we have an opportunity to look at live animals and work through the differences there and be able to describe them, that's just extremely valuable from an education standpoint. And so we're really excited about the opportunity to be able to do that. And oftentimes, much of the information that we present in Extension is through PowerPoint format or formal educational sessions, and those are great and fit a very specific and important role for us from an education standpoint. But interactive, hands-on types of learning events are more challenging for a myriad of reasons to be able to put together. But we really think that producers really are very receptive to those, and so we're very, very excited to be able to do that this year. And so we just encourage folks to be able to come and join us. We've got additional information on our beef extension website, ksubeef.org, as well as with the Shawnee County Extension Office there in Topeka. Abigail Gettinger and myself are the main folks that are putting this program together, but we'll have assistance from other extension agents as well too. So feel free to contact us for additional information, and we hope to see folks there.
Jason, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Shelby. Appreciate it as always.
That was K-State Cow-Calf Extension Specialist Jason Warner discussing the upcoming hands-on beef cattle nutrition demonstration that will be taking place at the 2025 Topeka Farm Show. This demonstration is titled Fundamental Tools to Manage Winter Beef Cow Nutrition Programs. There is no cost to attend, and pre-registration is not needed. These demonstrations will be taking place on January 7th at 9:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m., on Wednesday, January 8th at 9:30 a.m., 11:30 a.m., and 4:30 p.m., and January 9th at 9:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. I will link the resources that Jason mentioned if you'd like to find out more information about these demonstrations in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you after the break.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. Dairy producers wanting to improve the management of their calves should be using the technology and data that's already being collected. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says that one of the key measurements is whether the calves get good passive transfer, something that can be determined through blood serum tests. He says that dairy farmers might also want to track cases of pneumonia and scours in their calves and average daily weight gain.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning your calf program and how you might keep closer track of those animals that are under your care. As we look at our next generation for our dairy farm out there in the calf huts, there's some things that we maybe need to think about in terms of how we apply technology and data to these young animals. Many things have changed in the last 20 years as we think about the care of these calves. We've gone to different types of feeding programs. There are different ways that we can track these animals now to assure that they stay healthy. So you become more of a calf manager rather than just a calf feeder. And as we think about managing, we need to have data to do that. So what are some critical data points that you might consider collecting on your farm? Well, number one, kind of a gold standard, is did the animals get good passive transfer? And we can do that through simple blood serum tests to look at the protein levels in the blood of the calves. And as we look at those, you're going to see some variation, but some of the things that you need to think about is 40% or more of your calves should get excellent passive transfer. Another 30% should be in the good range, and only about 10% should be in poor. So when we think about passive transfer, how well are you doing on your farm? Well, if you're not doing any measurements, you really don't know. So if you don't know, it's really hard to assess that. Another way that we can look at that is we can look at the cases of pneumonia and scours in your herd. For these pre-weaned calves, we should see less than 10% of the herd suffering from pneumonia, and less than 15% should suffer from scours during this time. So as we think about that, if we're having higher levels of pneumonia and scours in our herd, we might want to start checking the serum blood levels to see what those protein levels actually are and whether or not we're getting effective passive transfer. Now, aside from that, what are some other things that you can do on your farm to assess calf growth? Well, weight is something that we should be concerned about, and one of our goals for our herd should be that we double the calf's weight by the time they're weaned or within 56 days of life. That means that you have to achieve an average daily gain of 1.1 to 1.6 pounds per day, which is achievable, but it's going to take some work to get there. So reviewing our nutrition program and making sure we're getting calves started onto some starter feed early in life will be very important in obtaining those goals. Now, the other thing that's really important in obtaining that gain of weight is making sure that the animals stay healthy. Some recent changes in monitoring calves through electronics may help us do that. We now have ear tags that these animals can wear that will actually help monitor their intake as well as their health and movement. Those can be very beneficial in detecting whether or not an animal is becoming sick. And in some cases, we may pick up calves becoming sick 7 to 8 hours prior to actually seeing clinical signs that we might identify otherwise. So there's technology that can be employed there. If you want to track the average daily gain of these animals, and you have automatic calf feeders, robots to basically feed your calves, scales can be installed to measure the front 2 feet or the front end of the animal, and those can be equated back to total body weights. They're fairly accurate and can actually be used to detect and track growth in these young calves. So you might take a look at the technology that you're utilizing around your farm, and maybe there are some changes you can make there to improve your ability to track animals actually through data. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to take a harder look at the data that they're collecting on their calves and how they might be able to use that to manage those animals.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.